In late August, working-level CIA and FBI officials realized that one or more al-Qaeda operatives might be in the United States. We have found no evidence that this discovery was ever briefed to the CSG, to principals, or to senior counterterrorism officials at the FBI or the CIA. Nor was the White House told about the arrest of Zacarias Moussaoui. We investigated awareness of the terrorist threat within the Department of Justice and the FBI during the spring and summer of 2001. Rice told us that she believed the FBI had tasked its 56 U.S. field offices to increase surveillance of suspected terrorists and to reach out to informants who might have information about terrorist plots. An NSC document at the time described such a tasking having occurred in late June, although it does not indicate whether the tasking was generated by the NSC or the FBI. At this point, we have found the following. On April 13th, FBI headquarters alerted field offices to a heightened threat from al-Qaeda against U.S. interests. The communication detailed the threats against U.S. interests abroad, but made no mention of any possible threat inside the United States. The field offices were asked to, quote, task all resources to include electronic databases and human sources for any information pertaining to the current operational activities relating to Sunni extremism, close quote. On July 2nd, the FBI Counterterrorism Division sent a message to federal agencies and state and local law enforcement agencies that summarized information regarding threats against U.S. interests from bin Laden. The message reported that there was an increased volume of threat reporting indicating a potential for attacks against U.S. targets abroad from groups aligned with or sympathetic to Osama bin Laden. It further stated, quote, the FBI has no information indicating a credible threat of terrorist attack in the United States, close quote. However, it went on to emphasize that the possibility of attack in the United States could not be discounted. It also noted that the July 4th holiday might heighten the threats. The report asked the recipients to, quote, exercise vigilance, close quote, and, quote, report suspicious activities, close quote, to the FBI. Acting FBI Director Thomas Picard recently told us that during his summer telephone calls with special agents in charge of each FBI field office, he mentioned to each the heightened threat, among other subjects. He also told us that he had a conference call with all special agents in charge on July 19th, in which one of the items he mentioned was that they needed to have their evidence response teams ready to move at a moment's notice in case they needed to respond to an attack. We found in our field office visits last fall, however, that a number of FBI personnel, with the exception of those in the New York field office, did not recall a heightened sense of threat from al-Qaeda within the United States in summer 2001. For example, an international terrorism squad supervisor in the Washington field office told us that he was neither aware in summer 2001 of an increased threat, nor did his squad take any special steps or actions. The special agent in charge of the Miami field office told us he did not learn of the high level of threat until after September 11th.
Central to the September 11 attacks was the terrorists' use of airplanes as weapons, which National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice addressed in a May 2002 press briefing. Quote, I don't think anybody could have predicted that these same people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another and slam it into the Pentagon, that they would try to use an airplane as a missile, a hijacked airplane as a missile. All of this reporting about hijacking was about traditional hijacking. You take a plane, people were worried they might blow one up, but they were most worried that they might try to take a plane and use it for the release of the blind sheikh or some of their own people, end quote. The joint inquiry confirmed that before September 11th, the intelligence community produced at least 12 reports over a 7-year period suggesting that terrorists might use airplanes as weapons. As with the intelligence reports indicating bin Laden's intention to strike inside the United States, the credibility of sources was sometimes questionable and information often sketchy. The reports reviewed by the joint inquiry included: 1. In December 1994, Algerian armed Islamic group terrorists hijacked an Air France flight in Algiers and threatened to crash it into the Eiffel Tower. French authorities discovered the terrorists into thinking the plane did not have enough fuel to reach Paris and diverted it to Marseille. French anti-terrorist force stormed the plane and killed all 4 terrorists. 2. January 1995, Philippine National Police raid turned up material in a Manila apartment suggesting that Ramzi Youssef, Abdul Hakim Murad, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed planned, among other things, to crash an airplane into CIA headquarters. The police said that the same group was responsible for the bombing of a Philippine airliner on December 12, 1994. Information on the threat was passed to the FAA, which briefed the United States and major foreign carriers. 3. January of 1996, the intelligence community obtained information concerning a planned suicide attack by persons associated with the blind Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman and a key al-Qaeda operative to fly to the United States from Afghanistan and attack the White House. 4. In October of 1996, the intelligence community obtained information regarding an Iranian plot to hijack a Japanese plane over Israel and crash it into Tel Aviv. A passenger would board the plane in the Far East, commandeer the aircraft, fly it over Tel Aviv, and crash the plane into the city. 5. In 1997, an FBI headquarters unit became concerned about the possibility of an unmanned aerial vehicle which would be used in terrorist attacks. The FBI and CIA became aware of reports that a group had purchased an unmanned aerial vehicle and concluded that the group might use the plane for reconnaissance attack. The possibility of an attack outside the United States was brought to be more likely, for example, by flying an unmanned aerial vehicle into a U.S. embassy or a U.S. delegation. 6. In August 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that a group since linked to al-Qaeda planned to fly an explosive-laden plane into a foreign country, from a foreign country into the World Trade Center. As explained earlier, the FAA found the plot to be highly unlikely given the state of the foreign country's aviation program. Moreover, the agencies concluded that a flight originating outside the United States would be detected before it reached its target. The FBI's New York office took no action on the information. 7. In September 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that bin Laden's next operation might involve flying an explosives-laden aircraft into a U.S. airport and detonating it. This information was provided to senior government officials in late 1998. 8. In November of 1998, the intelligence community obtained information that the Turkish Kamplikar, an Islamic extremist group, had planned a suicide attack to coincide with celebrations marking the death of Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey. The co-conspirators who were arrested planned to crash an airplane packed with explosives into Ataturk's tomb during a ceremony. Turkish press said the group had cooperated with bin Laden, and the FBI's New York office included the incident in a bin Laden database. 9. In February 1999, the intelligence community obtained information that Iraq had formed a suicide plot unit that it planned to use against British and U.S. forces in the Persian Gulf. The CIA commented that this was highly unlikely and probably disinformation. 10. In March 1999, the intelligence community obtained information regarding plans by an al-Qaeda member who was a U.S. citizen to fly a hang glider into the Egyptian presidential palace and detonate explosives. The person who received hang glider training in the United States bought the hang glider to Afghanistan. However, various problems arose during the testing of the glider. He was subsequently arrested and is in custody abroad. 11. In April 2000, the intelligence community obtained information regarding an alleged bin Laden plot to hijack a Boeing 747. The source, a walk-on to the FBI's New York office, obtained and claimed that he had learned hijacking techniques and received arms training in a Pakistani camp. He also claimed that he was to meet 5 to 6 people in the United States. Some of those persons would be pilots who had instructed to take over a plane, fly to Afghanistan, or, if they could not make it there, blow the plane up. Although the source passed a polygraph, the Bureau was unable to verify any aspect of his story or identify his contacts in the United States. 12. In August 2001, the intelligence committee obtained information about a plot to bomb the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi from an airplane or crashed an airplane into it. The intelligence committee learned that 2 people who were reportedly acting on instructions from bin Laden met in October of 2000 to discuss the plot. The CIA disseminated several of these reports to the FBI and to agencies responsible for preventing actions. These included the FAA, which is responsible for issuing security directives, alerting domestic and international airports and airlines of threats the intelligence community has identified. In testimony before the joint inquiry, the Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, mentioned additional evidence developed since September 11th concerning Al Qaeda's intention to use airplanes as weapons. Quote, after September 11th, we learned from a foreign government service that in 1996, bin Laden's second in command, Mohammed Atef, drew up a study on the feasibility of hijacking U.S. planes and destroying them in flight, possibly influenced by Ramzi Yousef's and Mukhtar's, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, unrealized plans, which were the Bajinka plot. Bin Laden's determination to strike America at home increased with the issuance of his February 1998 fatwa targeting all Americans, both military and civilian. The ideas about destroying commercial airliners that had been circulating in Al Qaeda leadership circles for several years appeared to have been revived after that fatwa in the early planning stages of the 9/11 plot. We believe that outside events also shaped Al Qaeda leaders thinking about an airliner attack. The October 1999 crash of Egypt Air Flight 990, attributed in the media to a suicidal plot, may have encouraged Al Qaeda's growing impression that air travel was a vulnerability for the United States, end quote. Despite these reports, the intelligence community did not produce any specific assessments of the likelihood that terrorists would use airplanes as weapons, and U.S. policymakers apparently remained unaware of the kind of potential threat. Former National Security Advisor Sandy Berger testified before the joint inquiry. Quote, we heard of the idea of airplanes as weapons, but I don't recall being presented with any specific threat information about an attack of this nature or any alert highlighting this threat or indicating it was any more likely than the other, end quote. In response to written joint inquiry questions, Deputy National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley asserted, quote, before September 11th, I do not recall receiving any information concerning Al Qaeda using aircraft as weapons for attacks within the United States. One CIA analyst stated that Al Qaeda was interested in possible hijackings in order to win the release of imprisoned Al Qaeda members, but did not mention the possibility of using aircraft themselves as weapons, end quote. The failure to consider seriously the use of aircraft as weapons may be the result of insufficient resources directed to intelligence analysis. Before September 11th, the Counterterrorism Center had 40 analysts who analyzed terrorism issues worldwide, with only one of its 5 analytic branches focused on terrorist tactics. As a result, the only terrorist tactic on which the Counterterrorism Center had performed strategic analysis was the use of a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons because of the obvious potential for mass casualties. Aviation-related terrorism was included in some broader terrorist threats assessments, such as the National Intelligence Estimate on Terrorism. For example, a 1995 National Intelligence example mentioned the plot to blow up 12 U.S. airliners and cited the consideration the Bajinka plot conspirators gave to attacking CIA headquarters with an aircraft laden with explosives. The FAA worked with the intelligence community on this analysis and drafted the section addressing the civil threat to aviation, which said, quote, our review of the evidence suggests that conspirators were guided in their selection of the method and venue of attack by carefully studying security procedures in place in the region. The terrorists operating in the United States are similarly methodical. They will identify serious vulnerabilities in the security system for domestic flights, end quote. A 1997 update to the 1995 NIE concluded, quote, civil aviation remains a particularly attractive target in light of the fear and publicity the downing of an airliner would evoke and the revelations last summer of the U.S. air transport sector's vulnerabilities, end quote. As a result of the increasing threats to aviation, Congress required the FAA and FBI to conduct joint threat and vulnerability assessments of security at select high-risk U.S. airports and to provide annual reports to Congress. The classified portion of the December 2000 report downplayed the threat to domestic aviation. Quote, FBI investigations confirmed domestic and international terrorist groups operating within the United States, but do not suggest evidence of plans to target domestic civil aviation. terrorist activity within the U.S. had focused primarily on fundraising, recruiting new members, and disseminating propaganda. While international terrorists have concluded conducting attacks on U.S. soil, these acts represent anomalies in their traditional targeting, which focuses on U.S. interests overseas, end quote. Thus, less than a year before the September 11 attacks, and notwithstanding intelligence information to the contrary, the FBI and FAA assessed the prospects of a terrorist incident targeting domestic civil aviation in the United States as relatively low. After September 11th, the CIA acknowledged some of the information that was available regarding the use of airplanes as weapons. A draft analysis dated November 19, 2001. The September 11 attacks, a preliminary assessment explains, quote, "We do not know the process by which bin Laden and his lieutenants decided to hijack planes with the idea of flying them into buildings in the United States, but the idea of hijacking planes for suicide attacks had long been current in jihadist circles. For example, GIA terrorists from Algeria had planned to crash an Air France jet into the Eiffel Tower in December of 1994. And Ramzi Youssef, a participant in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, planned to explode 12 U.S. airliners in midair over the Pacific in the mid-1990s. Likewise, the World Trade Center had long been a target for terrorist bombers, end quote. Despite that intelligence, the Joint Inquiry found no evidence that before September 11th, analysts in the Intelligence Committee were cataloging information regarding the use of airplanes as weapons as a terrorist tactic, sending requirements to collectors to look for additional information on this threat, or considering the likelihood that bin Laden, al-Qaeda, or any other terrorist group would attack the United States or U.S. interests in this way. The Counterterrorism Center's deputy director acknowledged that the CIA had not performed strategic analysis on airplanes as weapons before September 11th. He also explained ways in which the Counterterrorism Center had sought to improve its analytic capabilities since then. Quote, "We have a couple of approaches to strategic analysis in CTC now. We have spent a fair amount of analytic time looking at intelligence reporting that al-Qaeda going to use a particular type of tactic or go after a particular type of target, other intelligence reporting, that shows that they have actually trained at that tactic or trained for that type of target. When you get all three of those ingredients, that's pretty sobering. What is most alarming to us is the number of tactics that we've gotten that kind of case on, that three-legged case, on surface-to-air missiles, use of truck bombs and car bombs, the use of aircraft, both aircraft hijackings and aircraft as weapons, the use of improvised explosive devices like Mr. Reed put in his shoes several months ago, the use of poisons and toxins. Put it all together and you could say that al-Qaeda has built a handful of cards, any of which it could be playing, all of which it intends at some point and with some opportunity to play. Its choices are very broad and very frightening," end quote. Even if enough analysis is done to provide better analysis to policymakers regarding strategic threats, there remains the issue of how and how much influence the information will have in warning other federal entities in the private sector. In discussing what could have been done before September 11th, the Director of Central Intelligence told the Joint Inquiry that the failure to focus on the use of airplanes as weapons was just one area that should have been part of a systematic thought process to think about how you play defense. Tenet went on to say to the Joint Inquiry, quote, "You could disseminate all the threat reportings you want. You could do the strategic analysis about airplanes. You could do the strategic analysis about car bombs, truck bombs, assassination attempts, fast boats, and everything else. You could put all of that out there to people. Unless somebody is thinking about the homeland from the perspective of buttoning it down to basically create a deterrence that may work, your assumption will be that the FBI and the CIA are going to be 100% flawless all the time. And that will never happen," end quote.